Welcome to this deep dive. Today we're opening up really fascinating texts.
We really are.
It's part 2 of the book Commentary on Prayer, Zakat and Hajj. Or, for those familiar with the Arabic text,
Right, by the writer and tinker Abdul Jabbar Al-Waily.
Exactly. And our mission for this deep dive is to explore how a modern intellectual looks at these ancient, foundational Islamic rituals and attempts to sort of rescue their spiritual core from the overwhelming distractions of modern life.
Which is a massive undertaking, really.
Oh, absolutely. But to really grasp his approach, I want to offer an analogy right up front. Think about it this way. If you haven't been to the gym in, say, 5 years, a good personal trainer isn't going to make you run a marathon on day 1.
No, you'd probably pass out.
Right. They're going to look at you and say, look, a 10-minute walk around the block is infinitely better than nothing. The primary goal is just to get you off the couch.
Because demanding absolute perfection right out of the gate just ensures you'll probably quit, right? Before you even break a sweat.
Precisely. And Al-Waily applies this exact logic to the 5 daily prayers.
Yeah, that analogy captures his philosophy beautifully.
Yeah.
He recognizes how paralyzing that all-or-nothing mentality can be.
Right, like if you can't do it perfectly, why do it at all?
Exactly. When we think in strict binary terms, perfect compliance versus total abandonment, we just ignore the reality of human behavior. So he's looking at modern individuals who have completely walked away from prayer simply because of the sheer busyness of life.
The commute, the meetings, the emails.
Yeah, making 5 prayers a day feel like this impossible mountain to climb.
And his solution to that is surprisingly pragmatic, isn't it?
Highly pragmatic. Instead of condemning someone for falling short, he argues that praying just twice a day, or even once a day, is vastly superior to 0.
Which is a striking departure from strict traditionalism.
It really is. He advocates for reestablishing a tiny, manageable habit, hoping it eventually leads a person back to the full practice.
Right, and the philosophical reasoning behind that is what makes his commentary so compelling to read. He views religion fundamentally as a cure for the human conscience.
Yeah, let's look at the broader architecture of society for a second. We have modern secular laws designed to govern public behavior, right? They regulate traffic, commerce.
Keep us from harming each other.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But secular law has limits. It can't reach your inner thoughts.
Right.
Religion, in his framework, is designed to govern that inner self.
Operating without a police force, basically.
Yeah, relying purely on the internal conscience. So from his perspective, if an individual abandons that internal framework entirely because the external rules feel too rigid,
Then it's not just the individual who suffers.
exactly, the moral fabric of the whole society begins to fray.
Yeah.
So keeping a person tethered to that internal conscience, even through a reduced practice, is a social imperative for him.
But I imagine, a lot of strict traditionalists would hear that and say, well, you can't just change the rules because people are busy. The rules are the rules.
Oh, for sure. They absolutely say that.
Yeah. So is there actually any historical precedent for a religion modifying its daily schedule just to accommodate work pressures?
That is a critical question, and Al-Waily actually anticipates it by pointing to this remarkable historical anecdote. He details a time when a delegation of Japanese Muslims traveled to negotiate with scholars at Al-Azhar.
Al-Azhar being one of the premier institutions of Islamic jurisprudence in the world, right?
Right, in Egypt. So this delegation presents a very modern dilemma. They essentially stated their deep desire to embrace the faith, but explained that the requirement for 5 daily prayers completely conflicted with their intense, highly structured industrial work schedules in Japan.
Wow. So they just openly asked if the number of daily prayers could be reduced.
They did.
That is a stunning collision of ancient tradition and modern industrial capitalism.
It's wild to picture, isn't it?
Just the image of an industrial workforce trying to negotiate terms with traditional scholars.
Yeah.
It highlights the exact tension Al-Waily is talking about.
It perfectly highlights his core belief. Inflexible adherence to the strict letter of the law can sometimes drive sincere, well-meaning people away entirely.
Right, by refusing to adapt the form of the ritual to fit the reality of the modern worker, you risk losing the person.
Exactly. Introducing a degree of flexibility, however, preserves the spirit of the law, which is simply maintaining that daily connection to the divine. He even notes that early in the faith, temporary concessions were made for those who found the full weight of the rituals too heavy at first.
Okay, so if we accept this premise for something as brief as a daily prayer, which takes what, maybe 10 minutes?
Yeah, roughly.
It makes you wonder how this logic stretches to the truly demanding practices. Because if finding 10 minutes a day is a struggle, how does a modern, perpetually distracted person handle an entire month of fasting during Ramadan?
Right. Well, this is where Al-Waily shifts into sociological observation, and his analysis here is incredibly sharp. He notes a massive, undeniable cultural shift regarding fasting that occurred over just a few decades.
What kind of shift?
Well, he points out that back in the 1930s, if someone skipped the Ramadan fast without a valid medical or travel exemption, they were viewed as a shocking anomaly.
Like they were social outcasts.
Essentially, yes. The communal infrastructure and social pressure to fast were absolute.
Fasting was just the default setting of the community. You didn't even have to think about it because literally everyone around you was doing it.
Exactly. But then he contrasts that with the reality of the 1970s. Over those 40 years, the situation in urban centers completely flipped. Young people who actually chose to fast were suddenly viewed with surprise.
Wow, they became the anomaly.
Yes, exactly.
But what drove that massive psychological shift? I mean, 40 years isn't that long in the grand scheme of a major global religion.
No, it's a blink of an eye. Al-Waily attributes this flip directly to the explosion of modern distractions and sensory overload. He explicitly points to the rise of radio, cinema, mass-market magazines.
All the new media of the time.
Right, and alongside all of that, the relentless economic pressure of contemporary life. Historically, a month-long fast was supported by a quieter, more reflective environment.
That makes sense.
But when you are constantly bombarded by mass media, entertainment, and the high-stress demands of a modern economy, the mental bandwidth required to sustain that level of bodily discipline just evaporates.
Okay, I understand the sociological shift, but I have to push back here just to represent anyone listening who might be a bit skeptical.
Sure, go ahead.
If society changes, right, if we invent the cinema and the radio and our cognitive environment gets louder, do the ancient rules just bend to accommodate our shorter attention spans? Doesn't that defeat the entire purpose of a steadfast tradition?
It's a very fair critique.
Because discipline is supposed to be hard. If you make it easy, it's no longer a discipline.
That is the essential tension running through his entire commentary. But Al-Waily is careful here. He doesn't deny that fasting is a fundamental pillar of the faith. He isn't saying that the existence of movies cancels a divine commandment.
Okay, so what is he saying then?
He is attempting to engineer a pragmatic safety net for those who are actively slipping away.
You mean the people who look at a 30-day fast, feel totally overwhelmed, and decide to just do zero?
Exactly those people. For that specific demographic, Al-Waily proposes a compromise based on, well, spiritual triage.
Spiritual triage, I like that term.
Yeah. So if fasting for a full, unbroken month feels genuinely impossible due to the psychological and economic pressures of modern life, he suggests fasting for 15 days.
Half the month.
Right. Or, at the very absolute minimum, he suggests fasting on the odd-numbered nights of the last 10 days of Ramadan, which holds special spiritual significance anyway.
Right, the night of power, which usually falls in those last odd nights.
Exactly. His objective isn't to erase the rule, but to salvage the function of the practice.
Because fasting serves a specific purpose.
Yes, to practice self-discipline, to physically feel the sensation of hunger so you develop profound empathy for the poor, and to maintain a tether to the divine.
And if a person fasts for even 5 days, they still experience a measure of that empathy and discipline.
Right. But if they abandon it entirely out of that all-or-nothing mentality, that spiritual muscle completely atrophies.
Okay, so we have this framework for personal bodily discipline. Fasting is intensely individual. But religion isn't just about what you do with your own body, right? It's about what you do with your resources.
Very true.
So how does this pragmatic function over form mindset apply when we start talking about money and the broader community?
Well, that transition brings us to perhaps Al-Waily's most progressive and debated view, which centers on the concepts of Zakat and Khums.
The ancient systems of religious charity and wealth redistribution.
Exactly. In the ancient world, these mandatory religious alms were established to eradicate extreme poverty, to support the vulnerable, and to fund the basic administrative functions of the early Islamic state.
They were basically the social safety net centuries before modern government welfare existed.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But today, we have the modern nation state, we have the IRS, or its equivalent wherever you live, collecting taxes. So how do these ancient religious financial systems survive alongside a modern tax code?
That's a huge question. What's his answer?
Al-Waily looks at the modern world and makes a really bold connection. He argues that state-mandated progressive taxes and retirement deductions exist to solve the exact same problem that Zakat and Khums were created for.
Interesting. Because modern taxes are designed to fund public infrastructure, support welfare programs, maintain the state.
Yes, exactly. Therefore, he concludes that if a modern person pays state taxes that equal or exceed what they would traditionally owe in Zakat or Khums, their religious financial obligation is fulfilled.
Wow. That is a massive paradigm shift.
It really is.
Let me try an analogy to make sure we are fully grasping the mechanics of this. Imagine you live in a town with no police force, so you and your neighbors agree to a personal budget where you chip in for neighborhood security guards.
Okay, makes sense.
It's a moral and practical duty to keep the community safe. But then the city formally incorporates and starts collecting property taxes to build a professional police department.
Yeah.
You wouldn't keep paying the neighborhood guard fee on top of your city taxes because you'd be double paying for the exact same outcome, right?
Sure.
Safety.
That captures his logic perfectly. The religious text is primarily concerned with the outcome, which is wealth redistribution and social stability. If your secular taxes are lower than your calculated religious zakat, then you merely pay the difference at charity.
Ah, okay.
But you do not ignore the substantial taxes you've already paid for the public good.
But hold on, I can see a major objection here. Secular taxes go toward all sorts of things: repairing highways, subsidizing agriculture, funding the military, paying bureaucrats.
Sure.
Zakat has very specific spiritually mandated recipients, primarily the absolute poorest and most destitute in society. It is an act of spiritual purification.
Yeah.
Doesn't commingling a spiritual offering with secular government taxes completely dilute the religious intent?
It's a strong objection, and many traditional scholars raise that exact point. To defend his position, Al-Waily relies heavily on the concept of intent, and he brings in a very specific historical precedent to prove that Islamic law has historically allowed the form of a financial obligation to change as long as the underlying function is met.
Oh, really? What's the precedent?
He points to the historical practice of the jizya.
Okay, let's define the jizya for the listener just to ensure we're all on the same page.
Historically, the jizya was a specific tax paid by non-Muslim citizens living within an Islamic state. In exchange for paying this tax, these citizens were exempt from military service, and the state was legally obligated to provide them with military protection.
It was a clear social contract.
Exactly. However, Al-Waily points out a crucial shift later in history. When non-Muslim citizens eventually began joining the Muslim armies to actively defend the state themselves, the jizya tax was entirely dropped.
Oh, I see. Because they were paying their debt through physical service rather than financial contribution.
Yes. The underlying purpose of the rule, contributing to the defense and stability of the nation, was being met through a different mechanism. The external form changed completely, but the internal function was fulfilled.
That's a brilliant connection.
And Al-Waily maps that exact historical logic onto modern taxes and zakat. If the modern tax system is fulfilling the function of maintaining society and providing a baseline of care, then the religious requirement is satisfied, even if the money is routed through a secular treasury rather than a mosque.
It's a fascinating argument about not burdening people to the point of resentment, because if someone feels doubly taxed, they might begin to resent the religious obligation altogether.
Which defeats the purpose of a spiritual practice.
Right. Okay, so we've explored daily personal discipline and local financial duties. But what happens when those two things combine on a massive global scale? I'm talking about the Hajj pilgrimage to Mecca.
Oh, yes. The ultimate combination.
This is a massive physical exhaustion, a massive financial commitment, an immense logistical scale. Does his pragmatism survive contact with millions of pilgrims?
It absolutely does. In fact, the logistical scale of the Hajj is exactly what triggers some of Al-Waily's fiercest pragmatic critiques.
Really? How so?
Well, to understand his approach, we have to look at the traditional conditions required before someone is even obligated to perform the Hajj. A person must be of mature age, of sound mind, and crucially, they must have the financial and physical capability. This is a concept known as istita.
So it's not a blanket mandate for everyone at all times. There are prerequisites.
Correct. But Al-Waily introduces some deeply human-centric interpretations of what having that financial capability actually means. For instance, he asserts that if a person has a limited pool of savings and they are forced to choose between getting married and performing the Hajj, getting married takes absolute precedence.
Wow, that is a profound statement about societal priorities. He's saying that building a family in your local community is more urgent than completing a foundational pillar of the faith in Mecca.
He is.
Why is marriage elevated to that level?
Because he recognizes the vital social and personal importance of establishing a stable life. We discussed earlier his view of religion as a cure for the conscience and a stabilizer for society, right?
Right.
An unmet human need for companionship, or the financial inability of young people to start their lives, can lead to deep societal instability and personal despair. If a young person drains their entire life savings for a one-time pilgrimage and then returns to a life of isolation or poverty, the local community suffers.
That makes total sense. Addressing that immediate human need fulfills a higher religious purpose than checking a box on a spiritual to-do list.
Exactly. It's a powerful reminder that rituals are meant to serve humanity, not the other way around.
But his critique goes beyond just personal finances, doesn't it? Because he has some very strong words about the physical logistics of the Hajj itself, specifically the animal sacrifice.
Yes, the Hadi. During the Hajj, pilgrims traditionally sacrifice an animal to commemorate the story of Abraham. But the ancient rule, the absolute non-negotiable core intent of this sacrifice, is that the meat must be distributed to the poor.
It is fundamentally an act of mass charity,
Yes.
which makes perfect sense in a localized ancient economy. But when you have millions of pilgrims descending on one city in the modern era, all trying to perform a sacrifice on the exact same day.
You end up with an immense logistical nightmare. The modern infrastructure simply cannot butcher, preserve, and distribute millions of animals to the poor fast enough.
Oh no. So what happens?
Consequently, Al-Waily strongly condemns the resulting modern practice, where, simply to fulfill the technical requirement of the ritual, millions of animals are slaughtered, and the meat is literally buried in the earth or left in the open air to rot.
That is staggering. The idea of millions of animals being wasted while global hunger exists is incredibly jarring.
Al-Waily is furious about it. He calls it an unjustifiable waste. He points out that this practice spreads disease, pollutes the environment, and completely violates the core intent of the ritual, which is to feed the hungry.
Right, because from his perspective, an act of massive, deliberate waste cannot possibly be considered an act of worship.
Exactly. Wasting food is inherently sinful in the tradition, so committing a sin just to fulfill a ritual is a logical and spiritual contradiction to him.
It really exposes the friction between ancient text and modern reality, and it brings up another massive logistical issue with the Hajj. How do millions of people from diverse backgrounds even agree on the basic practicalities?
Like what?
For instance, determining the start of the Hajj month relies on citing the new moon. Historically, different sects and regions have engaged in intense debates over when the moon is officially sighted, right? Which dictates when the rituals actually begin.
Oh, absolutely. That debate over the moon sighting is a perfect testing ground for Al-Wali's philosophy.
What's his solution?
His solution is, predictably, highly rational. He proposes establishing a unified cross-sectarian committee that utilizes modern astronomical tools to mathematically and scientifically calculate the sighting of the moon.
Thus removing human error and subjective debate from the equation entirely.
Yes, exactly.
Using science to bypass centuries of sectarian disagreement. But what if a specific sect rejects the math or insists on their traditional method of sighting?
He goes a step further to address that exact scenario. He argues that even if a pilgrim's specific personal sect disagrees with the local moon sighting declared by the authorities in Mecca, that pilgrim should follow the local Meccan ruling anyway.
Wait, really? Just abandon your personal sectarian ruling and go with the crowd?
Yes, because the overarching goal is unity. It ties into a concept in Islamic jurisprudence known as taqiyya.
Now, traditionally, taqiyya is understood as the practice of concealing your faith or compromising on certain outward rituals to prevent physical harm to yourself, right?
Right, or to ensure the survival of the community under threat. But Al-Waily applies a similar logic here for the sake of communal cohesion. The entire overarching purpose of the Hajj is the massive, unified congregation of the global Muslim community standing together.
So if everyone splits into fractured groups and performs the rituals on different days based on technical disagreements about a moon sighting,
that fundamental spirit of global unity is destroyed. Rational outcomes and community cohesion will always trump rigid adherence to secondary technicalities for him.
So if we step back and synthesize everything we've covered today from Abdul Jabbar Al-Waily's commentary, what we are looking at is essentially a masterclass in adaptation.
It really is.
Whether you, as a listener, are religious or entirely secular, there is something profoundly relevant about watching an intellectual try to keep a tradition alive in a world that is just moving too fast for it.
It is the ultimate survival strategy for ancient systems. He is relentlessly focused on the function of the tradition rather than its rigid form.
Exactly. He looks at the reality on the ground. He sees people overwhelmed by the modern economy, unable to find time for 5 daily prayers. So he says, look, just pray twice, keep the habit alive.
Right.
He sees an environment drowning in media distraction, making a 30-day fast mentally exhausting. So he advises fast for a few days to maintain your empathy for the hungry.
Yeah, triage.
He sees the state taking on the role of social welfare, so he reasons, count your taxes as your religious charity, don't burden yourself with double payments.
Exactly.
And he sees the sheer scale of the Hajj creating logistical chaos, so he demands, prioritize your marriage at home, do not waste food in the name of God, and follow the local calendar so the community remains whole.
He fundamentally believes that if you lose the function, the empathy, the personal discipline, the communal unity, the inner conscience, then the external form of the ritual is just an empty, meaningless shell anyway.
And that realization brings us to a lingering question, something for you to mull over long after this deep dive ends.
What's that?
If the external form of an ancient tradition changes completely to adapt to the modern world, like substituting an IRS tax return for a religious alms offering, or swapping a 30-day communal fast for a personal 5-day discipline, does it actually remain the same ancient tradition?
Ah, the classic ship of Theseus paradox.
Exactly. But applied to human faith, has it, through 1,000 tiny pragmatic compromises, evolved into something entirely new? Because at the end of the day, getting off the couch for a 10-minute walk is absolutely better than doing
It
nothing.
might even save your life.
It might. But we have to be honest with ourselves. A 10-minute walk is not a marathon.